This was my first time ever purchasing a house. I was 28 and looking for a place to settle down. I began my search for a house 5 months before my lease ended at my current residence. One place I found was perfect, but it was far over my budget, so I had to pass on it and keep searching. I viewed a ton of other places and even thought I'd found a good home until that same house came up on my search again. The price had been lowered tremendously, putting it in the mid-range of my budget. I scheduled a tour and eventually bought the home. Obviously, I was ecstatic. Felt like a really big move forward in my life. It was a 2-story home with a basement and a large yard surrounded by trees. The only slight issue was that it was 20 minutes away from most stores and shops. But since I worked from home, I didn't need to go out all that much. Within the first few days, though, things got a little strange. While working from the living room one day, I heard some sounds coming from the basement, things moving around or dragging on the floor. I got up and opened the door to the basement, but the sound stopped. It was silent. I turned on the light and walked a few steps down, but nothing was there. I had only a couple of boxes in the basement, so it was entirely empty aside from the water heater and air conditioner in the far corner. I had only been in the place for a couple of days, so I thought I just wasn't used to the sounds the house made. After all, there wasn't anything in the basement. But only a day later, I heard it again. This time it was more of a soft, wooden-sounding thud, maybe a piece of wood hitting the wall. I went down the basement stairs all the way this time and did a perimeter check around the walls. But again, the basement was empty, so there was nothing to even check. Still, I blew it off. What could it possibly even be? I didn't believe in anything paranormal, so logically, it had to be the house. During the first week of staying in my new house, I experienced these sounds probably 6 or 7 times. By the 4th or 5th time, I stopped even checking and started ignoring it. That was until I explored the outside of my house. I was just walking around, enjoying the nature scene, when I noticed one of the tops of the basement window wells was missing from the side of my house. It wasn't an alarming find, just something I needed to fix right away before it rained and flooded my basement. I went out, got a cover from a hardware store, and installed it that day. That night, I went to bed early but woke up at 11 p.m. to another wooden thud sound from the basement directly below me. A second later, I heard something else. This time, it was very distinctly footsteps going from one side of the basement to the other. I was horrified. Part of me was absolutely positive there was someone in my basement, but there was another part of me that thought it could be something I was imagining or even somehow another noise from the house. I needed to know for sure, though. I took the bat that I kept in my room and walked downstairs to the basement door. Just before I approached it, though, an extremely loud thud came from outside the house. I stopped in my tracks, waiting for anything else. Then I opened the basement door and walked down slowly. Nothing was there, just the same empty basement. I looked all around and even waited for a few minutes for more sounds, but it was just like every other time. As soon as I'd open the basement door and look around, it would be silent. I got really uneasy after a few minutes and went back upstairs. I put a chair in front of the basement door so that if there was somehow someone down there, I'd at least have a heads up if they tried to open the door. The next morning, I checked the basement again, but something felt different. It was much brighter than usual. I checked the window well and could see from the bottom that the top cover was gone again. I went outside and looked everywhere for it, but it was completely gone. That was enough for me to call the police. Something was going on. They sent one officer who took notes from me, then searched around the basement. He found just as little as I did. I got a new cover for the well and hired a handyman to come out and install bars on the window from the inside. After that, I never experienced any more sounds or noises. I don't know what exactly I was dealing with in my basement. Maybe someone squatting there or maybe something else. Even now, though 3 years later, I still have that fear in the back of my mind of hearing those sounds again. It was the beginning of winter when I had to make a big change of location for work. There was no way around it due to my position unless I quit, but I really didn't want to do that. Unfortunately, they were making me move several states over to a place I'd never been to before. It was a small town, a decent way outside of the city, that just so happened to have a large warehouse where I'd be working. With no real way to get there beforehand, I had to rent a place without ever seeing it in person. The options were minimal, given the size of the town, so I wasn't very confident in my choice, but I tried to keep my hopes up. When the day came, I left my hometown and drove for 2 days to the new place. When I first made it to the town and drove through the roads, I felt very out of place. I had always been a city person, and this was the most small-town-looking town I'd ever been to. There were very few neighborhoods with newer houses, as most of them were old 1900s-looking homes. The neighborhood my place was in seemed to be a mix of these houses, which looked a bit strange, but at least my house was one of the somewhat newer ones. I parked on the side of the street and walked up the driveway, which had a shipping container in the middle, delivered with all my stuff in it. I opened the house key from an envelope and unlocked the front door, stepping inside for the first time. Seeing an empty house is never the best way to judge if it'll be good or not, but this place looked a lot worse than it did in the pictures. There were cracks running along the walls and water stains all over the ceiling, things that must have been photoshopped out of the pictures. The rooms weren't very spacious either, but honestly, after seeing all the other houses, this one was probably one of the best in the town. Once I was done looking through the rooms, I went back to my car and got out the air mattress and a couple of backpacks full of stuff. It was already really late, and I didn't want to do any big moving until the morning. I decided to set up the air mattress in the living room. I don't know. Sleeping in an empty bedroom in an empty house made me uncomfortable, so I just stuck with the living room. I turned off all the lights and laid down. I was really tired, but I still had trouble getting comfortable. About 33 minutes went by of me just lying there and trying to sleep before a knock at the front door startled me up. I looked over at the door, then tapped my phone to check the time. 1 a.m. Nobody should be at the door this late. I got up and quietly went over, looking through the peephole. There were 2 men, both standing on the porch and looking at the door. It was dark, but neither of them had defining features. I stayed and watched them, not saying anything, and waiting for them to leave. They knocked again, showing no signs of leaving anytime soon. I wondered what they could possibly need at this time of night, and I really couldn't think of anything reasonable. Another 30 seconds passed until one of them turned around and started to walk away, followed by the other. After they were gone, I sat back on the mattress and tried to figure out why they came here. I spent at least 15 minutes just lying down and thinking, but I guess I was more tired than I thought, because I drifted to sleep. When I woke up, it must have only been maybe half an hour later. I was still half asleep, but I heard a long, quiet creak come from across the house. I quickly got up and turned on the light. I didn't know if it was just the house creaking or something else, but I was already on edge. I walked down to the room at the other end of the house where I'd heard the sound from, but at first nothing seemed off. It was just an empty room. That was until I saw a very small gap between the window frame. It was just slightly open. My stomach dropped as I closed and locked it. I had no idea if it was like that before or not. I didn't remember ever checking the windows. My mind was racing, though, making me go through the house and check all the windows and doors. But as I went around the upstairs rooms, there was a single scuffed shoe print right in the middle of the hallway. Thankfully, there was no one in the house anymore, but it didn't take away the horror of it. Police came quickly after I called, confirming that it was very likely someone had come in that night through the window. The fact that 1 or 2 people had come in through the downstairs window and must have walked through the entire house to get upstairs, all happening while I was sleeping in the middle of an empty room, is a terrifying thought. You just have to wonder what they did when they saw me and what they were planning on doing. And did it have anything to do with the 2 men I'd seen just half an hour before? I still live in the same house, but I've never had any more strange encounters since that very first night. My best friend, who I'll call Alex for privacy, and I decided to rent a house together. We had talked about being roommates for a while because neither of us wanted to live with our parents anymore. We were attending community college and had jobs, so it felt like moving out was just the next step. After some searching, we found a really small, but still somewhat nice, home that was only a 10-minute drive to school. This was last year when COVID was still a big concern, so we were able to schedule a self-tour and look at it ourselves. We both thought it was that perfect kind of crappy yet cheap house for us to spend our college years in. It even had a decent yard and wasn't crammed together with neighbors all around. One thing that caught our attention, though, was this creepy old shed in the backyard. I mean, it just looked like a regular shed, I guess, but it had a padlock on it. In the description of the house online, it didn't mention it anywhere. Neither of us cared to use it anyway, so we ignored it and signed the lease. I was super pumped, and I could tell Alex was too. A month later, we moved in. The first week was great. This was both of our first times living on our own, so the freedom of it was amazing. On a normal Saturday night, I was in the living room watching TV, waiting for Alex to come home from work. It was only 7 o'clock, and Alex got off at 8 o'clock. Through the TV playing, I heard what I could have sworn was a large door shutting. Came from outside, and my first thought was the shed. There was absolutely no way I was going out there to check by myself. When Alex got back, I told him what I heard. He asked me over and over if I was sure it wasn't from the TV or something, but I knew it wasn't. "All right, let's take a look then," he said. We turned our phone flashlights on and went outside. We were maybe 20 feet away from the front of the shed, and everything looked exactly how it was before. The lock was still on the front, so there was no way someone could have gone inside and locked it from the outside. Alex gave me a look like I was crazy, and we went back inside. We watched TV for a while, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had heard. I was starting to question whether or not the sound was even real. At one point, while watching TV, I looked to my side, and a figure was standing outside the window, staring at us. Alex didn't see him, but he heard his footsteps running away, so we were on the same page this time. Alex asked what we should do, and I didn't know. We'd never had to deal with something like this before. I wasn't sure if that guy had something to do with the sound I had heard earlier either. We kept our eyes and ears open for a couple of hours, and with no further strange sightings, we went to bed. It took a bit for me to fall asleep, but I think I finally dozed off around 10 p.m. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange, bright red glow flickering across the walls of my room. It was coming through the slit in my window. As I became more awake, I realized I was hearing something too, a soft crackling sound, also coming from outside. I was still tired, and my head wasn't fully awake. But then I heard Alex call my name from the hallway outside my room. "Hey, wake up!" As I was about to ask what was going on, I was interrupted by something eerie, horrifying, and loud. Music! I turned my head to the window, pushing aside the covers. The shed was in flames and had just fallen over. The huge fire was getting close to the house. Alex called 911, and we both took his car and drove across the street. The fire department was able to get the fire extinguished before it got too serious. Only minor burn damage was done to the side of the house. We told the police about what we'd heard and the man I saw, thinking maybe he had done this, but there was nothing to go off of. Everything that was inside the shed was ashes except a few old metal tools. It makes me think that someone was doing something in there and probably burned it down to hide evidence of their doing. As soon as we moved in, it all just seemed like too much of a coincidence. I don't think we'll ever know what exactly happened that night, though, or what was going on inside that shed.